that you know what you're doing here. We're not going to talk about math or anything like that. But this series that Mr. Hart calls The Angle of Repose really started up at the university at UCSC. And up there they have a committee, or a group known as, it's UCCM, I think, is University Campus Christian Ministry. And Mr. Hart is a member of that particular group and on the board that oversees it. And I happen to be involved with one called Lutheran Campus Ministry. I ought to tell you where I come from. And years ago, I don't know if most of you know Reverend Yaney. He used to be a minister in Santa Cruz, but he went up to the university. And he became a pastor at work as his parish, the university up there. He also comes to Cabrillo a lot. And he began years ago a little group that met on Friday afternoon, and they would invite teachers to come in and just talk about what makes them like they are. And since Rich, most of you know Mr. Hart, he's a goer. In fact, he's gone to lunch. He's gone to lunch here. But he was bumped into starting a similar thing here at Cabrillo. And that's what he did. And he gives us suggestions as to what we're supposed to talk about and some questions. And he told me, as he told everyone else who does this, now you're not supposed to do an autobiography and say I was born on January 3rd, 1825, and I've done this and this and this. Instead, he looked me right in the eye and said, you're supposed to let your hair down. I looked at him a minute and said, that's going to be a little hard. Anyway, that's what it's all about. And so that it's supposed to be able to give students a chance to hear what makes a teacher like he or she is, and not just simply an autobiography. And so the title of it, Rich came up with, was The Angle of Repose. And if I was a true mathematician, I would answer the question very tersely and then sit down. And so I would say something like, arc sine 1/2. And my ordinate is half of my hypotenuse, and then I would sit down and be done. But I'm not a mathematician, I am a math teacher, and we suffer from the other problem. We don't know when to stop. So you are stuck somewhere in the middle there in this particular thing. So when you think of the title, and I've been asked several times recently, what do you mean by angle of repose? And the other question that maybe you don't ever see, but we as people who are going to participate see, it's supposed to be, what is the balance in your life? What makes you like you are? And that's supposed to be your angle where you relax, I guess, or what makes you work. And so that's the title of this series. It has been going on a long time. In fact, I don't like it. They come along. I think I did the first one, and I remember a long, long time ago. But anyway, that was what it was supposed to be. Well, being a person who's kind of usually optimistic, and I like humor, a lot of people have asked me that question way before I got here. And I always used to humorously answer them. I was raised on a farm during the Depression. And there was a lot of hard work. There was never any money. And I always used to think if I could get out of there, anything else would be great. And you see, I'm not farming, and I'm not sitting there. And in fact, I remember when I first went to college, I lived in a co-op because there wasn't any money then. And all we had to do was do the dishes after we ate, and we were all done. I couldn't get on with that. If you've lived on the farm, you know most of it just starts about after supper there, you know. When I went in the Army, I remember I took basic training in all places in Fresno, California. And I remember we used to have to get up early, but at 6 o'clock we'd go to dinner and you were off for the rest of the evening. And finally, when I became a teacher, I remember I could go to the track meets and baseball games and never had to go home right away to milk the cows or feed the chickens. So I've got to say to you, humorously, maybe that's why I'm very happy most of the time. I'm not doing it anymore. But seriously, you know there has to be more to it than that. And so when I was kind of thinking, what world could I say that makes me like I am, it really comes from three standpoints, and it probably is true for most of you the same way. From family, and for me, the church is important, and also the job I have. Those three things, I think, are what make me like I am. I thought I might talk about each of those 3 points. First of all, my family, my father and mother both immigrated from Norway. So they were immigrants, and they were very, I don't know, happy to be here or eager to be here. And when they had a family, they were very eager to make us Americans. I don't know why. I got a name, James Milton. Can you believe it? Norwegian heritage, I still don't believe it. That's what happened to me. But my father and mother were very close, and very close to we kids, and they were very eager to have us know the difference between what is right and what's wrong. And when I didn't understand it through the head, I had to learn it through the back end. And it seemed to have taken, I think, pretty well. But they were also conscious that I had roots, and that there was a background, there was more to life than just me arriving here, you know. Most of us think the day we were born, that's the day life started, you know. But it really isn't true, and long after we're gone, it will still be going on also. And so I was very much aware that I was Norwegian. And in fact, my mother happened to come from the northernmost part of Norway. I don't know if any of you have ever looked at the map recently, but when I say the northernmost part, I mean it. And this past summer, I had the thrill of my life. I got to go there on a trip. And I met, unfortunately, most of my uncles and aunts were dead that I had heard about all my life. But I met many first cousins who were my age, and that's quite an experience. And all of you who watch Roots on television, I think I know really why it had such an impact. Because here I am up in the northernmost part of Norway walking around with people who knew all about me, and I didn't really know that. In fact, the biggest thrill I had was I was looking at a photograph album, an old one, and there was a birth announcement. And it wasn't a birth announcement for me. I almost fainted. I didn't even know they had them. But I swore, I won't tell you what it was. But anyhow, if any of you ever have the opportunity of going somewhere where there are relatives from a long ways back, it really is an experience. I know that because I just experienced it. My father's family, I had been there before. They came from the southern part of Norway, and so that was not quite the thrill this summer as it was back in 1953, the first time I went there. But anyway, so I do feel that the family had really an influence on the way I am today. It was interesting in northern Norway to know when I was there for a couple of weeks, the sun never went down. It truly was the midnight sun. I remember at midnight sitting there and watching it come down on the horizon like I watch it here in Santa Cruz. Instead of going under, it turned around and went up. And that was a strange feeling. And then the reason I even brought it up, I think it's coming now, or just has passed. You know, in the winter, it's exactly the opposite. For about 40 days, it never comes up. And I think the sun has just come up and up there again, and I'm wondering how it affects everyone up there. Because it certainly is a strange thing when it never it was kind of interesting, and I know now why my mother was of the long-suffering kind. She would never say much, and it was, I think, part of that. And there were a lot of times she spent in the dark up there. But it is true, electricity in Norway is very cheap, so I'm sure all the lights in town were on, so it would be very sick that I don't know if they could tell the difference between night and day if electricity is that cheap. Then also my own family. Now when I am married, I've been very lucky. I think my wife puts up with me, and we have, I think, a fairly nice family at home. We had one tragedy. I lost a son at 17. I seen in Yosemite, and that was pretty hard to take. But all in all, I think that family has had a big influence. So I don't want all of you, especially younger people, to underestimate the influence your family has had on you. And I hope it has been for the good. Because in my case, I was lucky it was. The second thing that I think really has made a difference in my life has been the church. And since my father also felt the same way, was very eager about church things and training his children that way, I think I came upon it very early. And but I think I've also felt something inside that I think most people do, and that is that we are responsible for ourselves. I think even if I had never been to the church, I always would have felt that you are responsible for yourself. And not only are we responsible, but we want, I think, just instinctively, someone to recognize that we are doing something. And I think if you look at modern day today, that's what everybody wants, somebody who cares. And I think that is something that's just born inside us. Whether it is, God, or whether it is your parents, or your husband, or your wife, or boyfriend, or girlfriend, I think that's something that is in there. That is just born in us. And makes human beings like we are, I think, looking for something like that. And so I felt that for a long time. And since my father did bring me to church and Sunday school, I did meet the man Jesus pretty early. And in fact, I think I knew most of his teachings without knowing much about, all the rest of it. Because certainly those teachings were there, and it didn't take me long to feel that what he said was the way I think life has to be. All you have to do is watch what happens, and if you read newspapers, history books, and think about the future, you have to admit he had something going. And when you think of your interaction with human beings, the teachings were there. And so I think in spite of my father and his taking me there and all of that, if you ever do study it and look at it, you'll have to say everything else man has tried seems to fail. And I've always thought we ought to give that a try. And sometimes we do, and sometimes we don't. The other thing that I always felt about Christianity was that it was an individual thing. And that the message that Christ had and talked to us about was something for you. It was something my father couldn't do for me, my wife can't do for me. It is a very individual thing, just like that thing I was telling you about earlier, and I think there's something inside there that craves that attention, or you want somebody to know you are doing the right thing. And that part was very important to me. And the other thing that, for me, I think makes me a Christian is the property or policy of forgiveness. Now, we live our lives, and I don't think you're any different than I was. I'm just older. I've had more chance to err than you have now. And we don't always do what's right. We don't always behave with other people like we should. We sometimes do things physically to others that aren't right. We sometimes do things mentally that are sometimes even worse. And when you think of being responsible for yourself, I don't think we can make it the way we're built. And that was, to me, the whole message of life, is if that one has been the one of forgiveness. There is a chance, no matter where you are, to start it all over again. And you don't have to carry that burden on your back of all of these things that I'm thinking myself, and I can look back very easily. By the way, that's the nice thing of growing older. You remember all the early things better than the recent things. I hate to tell you that. That's why I can tell the power rules from the standard forms very early. Learn them early. But anyway, that I really think has had a profound effect on making me optimistic. And a lot of people call that cheap grace. That it's too easy to do what you want, and then just say, I'm sorry, and let it go at that. But it's a whole lot more than that if you take yourself seriously as being that. And the fact that I really do believe that in spite of all the people who have lived, all the marvels of nature, and all of that, God is interested in each of us as individuals. I feel if that wasn't important, my life would not be very meaningful. Because then you're just another one of the crowd. And I'm not sure all of us would accept that. There are times we like to hide the crowd because we don't want to commit ourselves to something. But I think just when you stop to think about yourself and you let your hair down, as Rich said, you got to admit that's it. Recently, I've had several good friends that have died. 2 of them have been more than 90 years old. And I always used to like these 2 fellas because they always said, how are you, young man? Getting up there. And both of these people happen to be Christian. I talked to them a lot of times about it. And, when you're 90, and you ask them what was important in your life, they always said to me, not the things you're worried about most of the time. And I said, well, how do you know what I'm worrying about? He said, well, it's about the same things I used to worry about. And it was a marvelous experience. It was amazing. One of them was in a rest home finally in San Jose, and another one in Santa Cruz. And they both died on the same day. It's amazing. And somebody remarked, I wonder what they thought as they both got on the boat to heaven. The other one said, what are you doing here? But whether that happens that way, that's the way people do things, I thought it was rather humorous. And a lot of people have wondered, how can you as a mathematician or a scientist really believe that the life hereafter is not a fairy tale and something that people conjure up for themselves to make you feel good while you're here. And, well, the answer to that is pretty easy if you heard what I just said a few minutes ago. That if you feel that you are of some importance living on the earth, then you would probably believe that. I always did like a quote from a mathematician named Weil, W-E-Y-L. He said, oh, it's obvious God exists because mathematics is so consistent. And I thought that was not bad because it really is. Then he says, on the second hand, I also know the devil exists because men can prove he's consistent. Then I had one more thing that I'll close with that on the church part there. Is there seems to be something that flows through the history of people that seems to move in different directions. And I don't know, I don't think that just is from chance. I think something is happening. I can just give you a non-religious example. I think that the United States and all over the world really, in politics, all of a sudden everybody's conservative. And it just sweeps through the world like nothing you've ever seen. You're not going to stop it. It's just going to run its course. Pretty soon we'll be liberal again. I don't know what it is, but it's just something that happens. And that's another thing of being older. You see it go, and here it comes back again. And I see why I'm smiling. He understands he's getting older. Those of you who know a little math know that when I started teaching, the right triangle was the only way to do trigonometry. And for 20 years, it went away to the wrapping function and to everything else. Let me tell you what has happened recently. The right triangle is back. It's long, they're back.
Some of them never left it.
Yeah, well, I didn't want you to point that. Now, the other thing I think, now I'll get off that now. The other thing that I think that has been very lucky for me is the job I got into. Teaching. It really is a nice job. And at least for me, mainly because of two things. Number one, students. Contrary to what some of you might think when I grade your papers, I really do like young people. They keep me young because there's nothing like looking at someone and when they actually see what's happening and you know it's the first time they really understood it. That's a great feeling. And it does something to the guy who thinks he tried to show you what was going on there. And I have always sort of felt, I like to try to show you how it works. I don't always succeed. You keep thinking if you had more time you'd make it. I don't think so. You have to give it the shot and let it go at that. And it's fun to look back at all the years I've taught. 1959 wasn't that long ago. Right here at Cabrillo, what, 26 years ago, I guess. It's sort of amusing to think, oh, look, those guys who were 18 are now 44. But anyway, just to see them, and you bump into them once in a while, it's just marvelous to see how they fought this battle of trying to train themselves at school and get going. And I remember when they'd say, if I don't get an A in engineering or in math or physics, how can I be an engineer? And I always like to ask them that question right now, because they are, and they weren't A's then. And what they'll tell you is, it didn't matter. I know it's important when you're young. I went through the same thing. The important thing is trying to learn something, and learn as much as you can. Too often we do have an awful lot of emphasis in grades. Anyway, so students are really interesting. And the other thing, I was very fortunate to become a mathematics major. I don't know how it happened, but math is an interesting subject. And it's never ending. See, if you got an A in everything you took, you wouldn't get the experience what I experienced. I always say before I retire, I'm going to try to understand it. So I've been working all my life trying to figure out what's going on here. And mathematics is a nice topic. It also is one in which we can fool people a lot. Everybody thinks you know something when really you don't. I don't know, remember when Cabrillo first opened, we used to have something every year called an open house, like they do in high schools and elementary schools. And I don't know if Mr. Wyant remembers this, but one night we got the duty and we're standing up there in room 710. And here come all these people by, and almost to a person they say, oh, mathematics, you guys are magicians, And after they leave, I never forget Lynn said to me one time, he says, we're the biggest frauds in the world. We know something. And it's true that we do have kind of a mystical subject only because somebody wouldn't take the time to learn it. Now, most of you are getting along far enough now to know that Mr. Ryan time, and I really thought we were making a good living at it. We didn't realize. So, for that reason, I really think my job has really had a big influence on the way I am. Another question Mr. Hart said we should address was, are there people who have made a difference in your life? And as I've already indicated, it's certainly true in the case of my parents. They always told me, you're going to college. I don't know how. They didn't have any money, and I certainly didn't have any, but I made it. So anyway, and so I won't go into that one anymore. But there are teachers that, you have known. I think of an elementary school, I had the same teacher for 4 years. 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th. You know what kind of school I went to. But that fellow was very good. He didn't like math and science, so I always wonder how I became a math major. But boy, he was a whiz in English. I never had any trouble passing English courses after those 4 years. But high school, there were several teachers there you could look at, and when you look back from the vantage point I have, they made a difference. I always like to think in college, because my first math teacher there was a very formal individual, and I didn't know until a lot later he even cared about students. But he did give me a real look at what mathematics was all about. Then another teacher I had at the University of Oregon was chairman of the department, and he was a guy who really cared about teaching mathematics. And he was one who used to sponsor institutes every summer so teachers would go to these and try to learn more about it. And Mrs. Miller and I both think very highly. She went to school there also, and she would tell you the same thing. She was very interested in the teaching. In fact, a lot of the purists and researchers in math always looked at him as having quit research because he took his interest in math. And then I had another teacher who this year happens to be president of the American Mathematical Association, Dr. Niven, and he was the guy who had the knack of, when he gave a lecture on something very complicated, he made it look very easy. Every time I hear he's going to give a lecture and I can get there, I now go. And he really had that knack. And I have to admit, those three sort of have influenced my life. But then there are obviously others. One of my favorites was from high school days, Carpenter. He was an old man then. In fact, he was about my age. Anyway, he was a very good carpenter. He could do anything with a carpenter's square, and all that. And his greatest delight was when I would come home from school and had studied algebra, trigonometry, and I was getting pretty slick now. And he would ask me, how would you cut this board? How would you do this? And I'd say, well, take a piece of paper there and I'll calculate it for you. And then I would see him smile, and I knew what was going to happen. He would lay that square down and he would know immediately where to cut it. He just knew, and he didn't really know any math. It was absolutely fantastic. He was a craftsman. He also used to like to play checkers a lot. And I always fancied myself as pretty clever checker player. And he was the guy that would always let me jump 2 of his in exchange for 4 or 5. He understood. And that guy taught me very early in life, don't take yourself too seriously. And anyway, then the question comes up, how did I ever, that I was supposed to address, how do you ever choose the job you do? How did I ever become a teacher rather than something else? That's especially interesting when I think of as I was a young man growing up in a farming community. The best job you could ever get was get out of high school and get a job working for the milk company and drive that truck, buy a pickup and get 2 acres and grow your own vegetables. That you could get to that. That would be it. school wasn't so important then. When I graduated from high school, very few people went on. But for some reason or other, I didn't choose that route. I just went to school and then made a mistake. I turned 18, and we shouldn't do that then. I went in the Army for 3 years. But anyway, when I think about how did I eventually become a teacher, there are things that happen in your life that do get you that way. When I was in high school, I remember, and I was reminded of this recently, when my daughter took out my old high school annual. I don't know whether you ever had any of these, but when you're my age and you look back, they're rather humorous. Well, she pulled this one out, and 2 of my friends had written in there, "Well, Professor, what are you going to do next?" In fact, one of them wrote, "Dear Professor, may I row you back down the river again?" That's the way he looked at it. By the way, he became a high school principal for 30 years. And he didn't like it. I don't know how he ever did. I do think that for some reason or other, I must have been a blabbermouth in high school then. Anybody have a little trouble with this man? I give you that. I didn't seem to have happened. When I went to college, when I returned from the service and my second year in college, it was very hard to get teachers then, and they had hired a young lady to teach some math courses, and 1 week after school started, she quit and got married and left and went somewhere. They were desperate, so they looked at some of us who were seniors, and I got a job teaching trigonometry. I'll never forget it. And they wanted me to teach like $50 a month for doing that. $50 a month. Boy, pumping gas and everything else. And, well, I started out, I could hardly spell my own name the first day, but I managed to get through it. And, I sort of thought, I think I could do this for a living. It would be pretty nice. And so I think that had a big influence, and I did it the rest of the time I went to school. Finally, when I graduated, somebody hired me, and I liked the job. And so I did it. Another question that was asked by Mr. Hart was, would you do it all over again if you did it this way? And when I look back, I'd have to say, yeah, I think I would do it. I think one thing I would have quit worrying about so much was that a lot of times I almost quit being a math major because I didn't get A's. I want to tell you now, I won't tell you what they were. And there were times I didn't even know what was happening. And students wonder if I remember this. I remember it very well. But anyway, the point was, if I had to do it again, I wouldn't be so concerned about grades. I think it all works out in the end, and I would worry more about learning something. I don't think I worried enough about the latter there. And it is true. And that really is about the only thing I wouldn't have been so upset all the time, You know, I'm pretty competitive, and it bothered me when, I couldn't do it, And now that I've taught a while, I do know that what I was fighting was some teacher would write an examination, and that examination may or may not really judge everything the way it should. We try to be perfect, but you don't always make it. And so now I say to myself, if I don't do well in the class, well, the guy asked the wrong question. It would have been all right. But anyway, of all the things I would change, I believe that would be the only. Another thing that happened to me, and I don't know how it happened, and you wonder now in your life how you end up where you are. I started out teaching in high school. I taught, 6 years in high school. And I liked it. I liked it as much as teaching here. Then I went overseas. I went to Europe. I was single then. To teach for the Army a couple of years because I wanted to go to Norway. I told them Norway. And I didn't know how I was ever going to get there otherwise. Well, something else happened. I got married while I was there a couple of years to the art teacher. But anyway, how those things happen. They do. And when I came back, I was looking for a job. a job opened up in a community college up in Washington, and that's where I started. And it was the only job I could get, and I got it. And then I found out all about community colleges, and I think it's the greatest place in the world. And I have enjoyed it. So you ask, how do you go from there to there? I don't think you can plan it. You young people are wondering now, what you got to do is get the degree first. That's all that matters. I would like to tell you, even at my age, they just ask, do you have a degree? And I'm still palming off the old one. It isn't working. It's a real meal ticket. And nowhere on it does it say your grades or anything. Just have you got it. And it's the truth. Now, I just tell you that. So stop getting too upset when you don't go to certain things. Then a couple of things. What's the hardest thing I have to do as a teacher? I really think the hardest thing to do is when you know you have a student that's worked its tail off, or hers, and they still didn't get the grade they wanted, an A or a B or a C. And yet you've got to be honest with them. If you're not honest, you're just fooling. You just have to say, to the best of my ability, I think it's a C, I think it's a B. And even worse is when you got to tell them B or F. That's hard. And of all the aspects of my job, I don't like it. That's it. But I'm getting now as I do it pretty easily. I've already been picked on. So I've heard it all. And last but not least, we were supposed to answer the following question. What do you think is the new values coming up in the future? Well, there is a saying, the more things change, the more they stay the same. It's going to happen to you too. Whatever is important now will go away. And if you live long enough, it'll come back again. You'll say, see, I know. You all know what I'm holding out for is my haircut. And you all look like me. And it may come back if I can just hang on long. We're getting closer. There was a period when I was worried. You can't believe how people will judge people on haircut. I have seen two students walk into my class, look, and the other one pokes the other one. I know exactly one more thing there. If I had to give you a piece of advice, don't take yourself too seriously. I mean that. Take yourself seriously in what you're doing. But don't think you've got all the answers when you're going to start telling everybody else the answers.